So I am going to teach you today about Erikson. And yes, that is his name. He came up with the theory of psychosocial development. All right, so there are a couple of rules with this theory that you need to understand. So the theory is 8 stages long. Starts when you are born, ends when you die. In each one of the stages, there is a task you have to accomplish, and Erikson calls it a crisis. All right. Some of the stages are really short. The first 3, for instance, are the first 5 years of your life. Some of the stages are really long. Middle adulthood is 20 years. So the earlier stages are more important to your development. And that's kind of upsetting to some because these are the stages that you have the least control over. All right, and I'll explain what I mean by that. Let's go back to the crisis. So you're faced with a crisis in each of these stages. You're either going to pass the crisis and develop in a healthy way towards your adulthood, or you're going to fail the crisis. If you fail the crisis, that failure can stick with you through adulthood, according to what Erikson theorized. It isn't a permanent failure necessarily, but earlier failures are harder to overcome because we don't remember the failure primarily, and we had little control over it. All right, so we are going to watch a quick video that summarizes this, and then I'm going to add in some of the details. One thing before we start that I want to point out is his theory is basically divided into 3 parts. The first 4 stages, that's like only 10 to 12 years of your life. They cover early childhood. The middle stage, adolescence, it says legacy alert because this is what he's known for. Before Erikson, psychologists thought we went from childhood to adulthood, and there was no middle ground. As you guys know, you probably don't consider yourself a child, but you certainly don't consider yourself an adult. So he described this period as adolescence, which now we we understand that adolescence is a time period of life that everybody goes through, but not until Erikson's work was that actually recognized. All right, and then there are 3 stages of adulthood, and this is the largest part of his theory. This spans, obviously, depending on how long you live, it could span 60 years of your existence. All right, so we're going to go through. On your chart, I want you to write down the life event that is in each stage, and then what does a success look like? Only a couple of words for the success, and then the failure is already written in for you.
They belong. How does one person feel confident and secure while another may feel depressed and question their life? In this lesson, we will discuss the conflict and growth associated with each stage of Erikson's psychosocial development theory. Psychologist Erikson, a major contributor to developmental psychology, proposed a comprehensive theory of the ways that individuals develop their identity, or in other words, a sense of who they are, and society's influence on that development. This theory is labeled the stages of psychosocial development and is characterized as a series of psychosocial stages that have a basic conflict and important event leading to growth. The theory was developed from his hundreds of clinical observations of children. Erikson identified 8 stages of psychosocial development of an individual. Characteristics of these stages include: each stage unfolds from the preceding stage in a particular sequence. Each stage involves an ever-widening involvement with others, and the centerpiece of each stage is a life task for the individual. Specifically, each stage involves a conflict between 2 opposites, and the individual's efforts at each stage are to achieve a ratio between the 2. Let's take a look at the stages now, and then group them into categories as we go. Birth through elementary school. The 4 basic conflicts from birth through elementary school are trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, initiative versus guilt, and industry versus inferiority. Trust versus mistrust occurs from birth to 12 to 18 months. The quality of the relationship between the infant and its mother or primary caregiver is essential to developing the infant's trust in the environment. And developing a sense of trust is the cornerstone of a healthy personality. The important event in this stage is feeding. The unsuccessful completion of this stage can result in an inability to trust and cause a sense of fear about the inconsistent world, leading to feelings of anxiety, insecurity, and an overall feeling of mistrust toward the world. Autonomy versus shame and doubt occurs between 18 months to 3 years old. As the child begins to stand firmly on his or her feet, he or she separates the environment into I and you, me and mine. The general significance of this stage consists of the maturation of the child's muscle system and the ability to coordinate such actions as holding and letting go, and the child's increasing ability to exert his or her will. The important event in this stage is toilet training. If children are encouraged in this stage, they will become confident and secure. If they are criticized or overly controlled, they will begin to feel inadequate in their ability to survive and become overly dependent on others, lack self-esteem, and feel a sense of shame and doubt in their abilities. The initiative versus guilt stage occurs between 3 and 6 years old. At the end of the 3rd year, the child learns to move around more freely, asks questions about many things because his or her language skills are more developed, and imagination expands. During this stage, the child's personality forms around imagination. This stage is characterized by a willingness to learn quickly and to make things together with other children. The important event in this stage is independence of activities. If children are given the room to be independent and play, the child develops a sense of initiative and security. If the child is controlled and not allowed to use his or her imagination, they begin to develop a sense of guilt and may feel like a nuisance to others. The industry versus inferiority stage occurs between 6 and 12 years old. The trend in this stage is observing how things are done and learning. In elementary school, this involves planning, working, and sharing with others. The important event in this stage is school. If children are reinforced by adults and teachers for their initiative, they begin to feel industrious and confident in their abilities. If they do not receive this reinforcement, they may begin to feel inferior and doubt their abilities. The danger in this period is the potential for developing a sense of inadequacy. The child may feel, for example, that skin color, parental status, or the cost of his or her clothes determines social worth instead of a will to learn. In these situations, permanent damage can be done to the child's sense of identity. In the middle and high school range, there's one stage in this period, identity versus role confusion, which occurs between 12 and 18 years old. Toward the end of adolescence, the person should have assembled elements of identity that are converging and abandoned those elements that do not fit. The adolescent's identity should have gradually integrated, for example, preferred capacities, significant interactions, and consistent roles. If this does not occur, the sense of who they are as a person can be hindered, resulting in confusion about themselves and their role in the world. The important event in this stage is peer relationships. Development of one's identity is not concluded at the end of adolescence. Adulthood consists of 3 basic conflict stages: intimacy versus isolation, generativity versus stagnation, and ego integrity versus despair. The stage of intimacy versus isolation occurs between 19 to 40, begins in young adulthood. A person pursues work or study for a career and psychological intimacy with another person. In time, this stage may include marriage and a family of one's own. The important event in this stage is love relationships. Successful completion of this stage can lead to comfortable relationships and a sense of safety and commitment. Avoiding intimacy and fearing commitment can lead to loneliness and sometimes depression. The second stage of adulthood is generativity versus stagnation, which is between 40 and 65 years old. Primarily, this refers to a person's interest in establishing and guiding the next generation. Parenting is the important event in this stage. However, simply wanting or having children does not automatically lead to generativity. During this stage, people begin to settle down in their careers and relationships. They give back to society through their careers and their children. Failing to achieve these objectives leads to feelings of stagnativity and unproductiveness. The final stage, integrity versus despair, which is between 65 years old and death, depends on the person's adaptation to successes and disappointments of the prior 7 stages in his or her life. Acceptance of responsibility for one's life, and service as the originator of others and the generator of things and ideas. The important event in this stage is reflection and acceptance of one's life. Failure in this stage is typically accompanied by a sense of despair and may include a subconscious fear of death.
Okay, so let's go over these really quick, and then I'll explain what we're going to do today. So the first column you should have had. So feeding and trust is stage 1. So here's why stage 1 is most important, and this has been reinforced by studies on chimpanzees. So if you remember the Harlow study, when the monkeys were not given that attachment and that love, they suffered greatly on not being able to trust other monkeys, having social issues. They have found this with people too. That first year is a really critical period for developing this idea of trust. Okay, so what does that look like in an adult? If a person does not develop trust, let's say that their parents aren't there for them, they're not consistent, let's say they didn't have parents at all, maybe they're abandoned in an orphanage, or there's a lot of different situations where little babies are not given the things they need. It's not to say they won't ever trust, but that trust does not come naturally, all right? So that first year is when that's established. So if you have a baby, you've got your babies on your desk, all you have to do is love the baby. Be there for it, show up for it, hug it, experience things with the baby, and that is how you develop that bond with your little baby. One day it will be real, one day not. Okay, so that's developing trust. A mistrust is obviously a lack of trust, and then in adulthood they'll have insecurity, anxiety, and relationship issues. Okay, so the next stage, autonomy versus shame and doubt. Toilet training was the key life event. If it's successful, then they can control their body. Remember, before they couldn't control when and where they go to the bathroom. Now they're learning how to control not just that, their body, but their behaviors. So maybe like in church, their parent will start to say, hey, stop. You can't yell in church. And then they will. They're learning that they have the ability to do things and control things at a small scale on their own. All right, a failure is that they're confident and secure in their ability to control themselves. A failure might mean that they doubt their abilities, right? They feel shameful. This is like Mrs. Waller and I both had little kids like this age. When they want to feed themselves, if you say, oh, no, don't feed yourself, you're going to make a mess. And then they might feel inadequate, like I cannot do that. Instead, just let them make the mess, let them get the food everywhere, and eventually they're going to be confident and able to do it, confident in themselves. That's how we build that in adulthood, okay? Initiative versus guilt is next. Independence of activities. And think about a little kid who's like leaving his parents for the first time. Maybe he's going to a friend or she's going to daycare. They're starting to get outside of the family, and they're learning that if they take initiative and they try things, that they can gain the confidence they need to develop a sense of security. All right. So a good example of this, like when our kids were little, me and Mrs. Waller, we have kids together. Just kidding. But my kids, like when we would go to the YMCA, they would want me to drop them off at the front. And to me, that's small. But to them, that was like a way that they can develop independence. Drop me off, I can find where I'm going myself. So that small thing leads to lasting confidence as a future adult. Remember, these are big time periods, 3 to 5. Small, but big. So there's a lot of events that happen in that time to help secure this child's idea of security. All right, if we don't allow them those experiences, if I were to say, oh, you can't find it on your own, you just need to wait for me, they may feel guilty about showing initiative. They might be dependent on others for the duration of their life, okay? Next, industry versus inferiority. Think about this as like the first time you leave your home and get judged by others. Judged by your grades, you're compared to your peers, you might start tryouts, you might make a team, not make a team, you start taking standardized tests, you get a percentage of how you scored against everybody. Like that can be something that's really hard for kids to go through. So this time period can be about 6 years. So I gave the example to my other classes. My son's pretty smart, but he failed the third grade guarantee. And I think, he was probably just a handful of kids, but he had to go through remediation, and they always kept talking about this test. And it really did hurt his confidence and like his ability to do well in school. At the same time, he was cut from a basketball team. So it was like not two great incidents, like really close together, that helped hurt his confidence. So we have been doing a lot of things to kind of build him up so that later in life, he's confident in his abilities, because a failure means that a kid is not. Now, keep in mind, over a long period of time, lots of good things can happen too to make people feel adequate. Now, where you are, adolescence. So some of you are probably getting toward the end of this stage, but I want you to think back to middle school when you had like different outfits, a different style, you had different friends, maybe somebody you don't even talk to anymore. You might have played a sport, an instrument, you might have wore your hair in like a really strange way, played some weird video game, right? And now you look back and you're like, haha, remember me? I was so weird back then. All right, that's all part of like figuring out who you are. Identity versus role confusion. You take all of those experiences and you think about the world around you. This is how it corresponds to Piaget. This is when we start thinking about abstract things. We can think about the world outside of us, think about our own views, and then come up with an idea of who we are. My argument is that this is probably the most important stage as you lead into adulthood, because knowing who you are and what you want frames the rest of your life in terms of who you choose to be a partner with, if you choose, your career, etc. All right? I told my classes, like, I remember going to college, and this will shock all you all, but when Mrs. Waller and I first started college, there was no internet at all. It did not exist. And I remember specifically telling one of my friend's dads, he was like, look it up on the internet if you don't know what it means. I'm like, what's the internet? Like, there was no internet. There's no phones, definitely no phones. And when I went to high school, like, culturally, things were a lot different. 30 years ago was when I graduated. So my first year in college was eye-opening. I went to college, and my next-door neighbor was a lesbian. Okay, I knew what, like, being gay was, but I had never, like, in real life met somebody who was gay. I went to Hilliard. It just wasn't a thing. But I'm sure it was a thing, but it wasn't a thing that I knew about. But when I went to college, things changed, and there was lots of different people and experiences, and that changed a little bit about how I saw the world. So this stage is not just high school. This will go into your college years, so you're in this stage, but you're not through that stage. Okay, so next, adulthood. This is Mrs. Waller and I. She is in I think actually we are in the same stage now. So the first stage of adulthood, intimacy versus isolation, this is 20 years, okay? So keep in mind, lots of experiences happen, but it's based on the idea of you knowing who you are and what you want. If you know, this is the career. These are the types of people that I want to be around. In this stage, it's a lot easier because you can date someone and be like, no, you're not it. Or you can leave a career that you don't want because it doesn't fit your goals. A passage of this is you feel safe that you can commit to a career, a person, a situation. A failure means that you have trouble like staying in a job. You don't really know like what you want. You're kind of like wandering, or relationship to relationship. You don't really feel satisfied. Okay? So again, if you know who you are, then entering this stage is great. I have 4 teenage sons. I beg them, please, please do not get married before your late 20s, and do not get locked in until your late 20s to one single person. Experience the world first. I got married at 27. How old were you, Miss Waller? About the same. 30. So that was ideal, all right? And statistics show people who get married in the adolescent stage before they are like 22, I believe the divorce rate is close to 90%. 90. The divorce rate for people who get married close to 30 is about 20%. That's how important identity is, okay? Now, the next stage is where Mrs. Waller and I are at, me more than her. So ages 40 to 60, 20 years. Again, this is where you spend the majority of your life. So the major thing is parenting, but not everybody parents, obviously. Not everybody chooses to have kids. Think of it like this. You have a lot going on. You're married. You have a relationship. You have kids. You have a job. You're getting older. You're thinking about, am I doing the right stuff for like where I want to be in my life? And you might have what's called a midlife crisis. Okay, that term came from Erikson. The midlife crisis is when the middle-aged person looks back at their life and they say, am I in a committed relationship? Do I know what I want? Am I like a good person? Is this where I want to be? And if the answer is no, they may make small or big changes. Perhaps they get a new job, leave their spouse. That's rare. Dress younger. There's a lot of different things the middle-aged person can do to kind of fix the path that they're on. Not everybody has a midlife crisis. It's actually pretty rare. And people who go through them, typically, it's like low level. Don't judge your parents if that's them. If they're asking to borrow your jeans, just let them. Okay? It won't last. So that a passage is we give back through all these different avenues. We feel like our career is successful. We are parenting our kids. Like my parents are aging. So is Mrs. Waller. Like we've both had to leave school to help our aging parents. And we have careers, husbands, like kids, but we also are individuals. So the middle-aged person is trying to maneuver all those things and make sure those paths are all going in the direction that they want. Okay? And then the last stage is integrity versus despair. And this is where we reflect. It's the best way to describe it. Like we look back and we say, hey, have I made the right choices? Is my family something I'm proud of? Have I given back due to my job? Have I been a good person? Can I leave a legacy? Do people look at me and think I've made a difference? If that's yes, we have a sense of peace and we pass. People who can answer no to those, most or all, may look back with some regret in their life and lack that sense of peace, which is sad. Again, that's rare. And sometimes, that's what the midlife crisis is for, to kind of deviate the path if we feel that's where we're leading. Maybe that career you have sucks, right? And you don't like it. So the midlife crisis can be a good thing to help us deviate to this sense of peace. Maybe we repair relationships. Maybe we look back and try to fix some of the wrongs that we've had to steer us toward this idea of peace. So that's Erikson's stage theory. So now we're going to apply it to the person that you created in the very beginning when we talked about the early adult or early infancy development. All right. So you remember making the avatar. What was that assignment, Ms. Waller? Do you remember off the top of your head? Was it the lifeline? Lifespan. Yeah. So you're going to go back and look. If you forget, if not, that's fine. Write in the name, the occupation of the person that you created. What was the temperament? This is where we rolled the dice. What was their temperament, parenting style, and attachment as a child? You can use the same avatar. A couple kids in my class wanted to age their person to a middle adulthood. Have at it. If you get the assignment done first and you have extra time, then go for it. All right, so what we want you to do, I'm going to give everybody a die and you're going to roll it. And if you get a 1, 2, or 3, then your person passes that Erikson stage. If you get a 4, 5, or 6, then the person fails that Erikson stage. So in the box, you're going to explain a hypothetical situation that your person might experience if they fail. So for instance, maybe we fail trust versus mistrust. So the person may not be able to form strong relationships with people as an adult because they're untrusting of the world around them. If you forget what the scenario means, on the document is a description of each stage, what a positive outcome looks like and what a negative outcome looks like. Okay, so you can refresh your memory. And there's one of these for each of the 8 stages. Once you're done with that, then you're done. Are there any questions?